This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everybody. Let's see. We're going to start off doing the Adjusters Exam Prep, kind of an exam prep course. If you haven't registered, you can start off by going to lgdstudy.com if you're interested. There's a PayPal link next to whichever course you want. Click on that PayPal link. You can use any credit card. You don't need to have a PayPal account. If you have a question while you're studying, or if you need help registering, give me a call. Or you can email me at lauren@lgdconsulting.com. Okay. Don't hesitate. You got a lot of support out there to get you through your exams. If you do have some areas where you need a little more clarification, reach out. Okay. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Keep in mind, even though this is Adjuster's exam, it's very similar to the property and casualty exam, and that fire and property are interchangeable. Your homeowner's policy is a fire policy. Your homeowner's policy is a property policy. The test may use a fire loss versus a property loss, and it's the same thing. So remember that the insured under a contract, that would be you and or yours in a contract. The insured of the client is the first party to a contract, and so if the client suffers a loss, that's called a first party claim. Now, the insurance company is a second party to a contract, so if you see an insurance policy, they're going to use the verbiage we or us. So we or us, the insurance company, are going to cover you and your stuff in case of a loss, a covered loss. All right. Now, when you hear the word casualty, think of it protection against a number of occurrences. Liability, of course, makes up the biggest area of casualty coverage, but we will also discuss workers' compensation. So in an insurance contract, it's going to be coverage for them or their stuff. All right. Very commonly, liability phrases are bodily injury and or property damage. And remember that bodily injury and property damage or liability covers other people. So if the insured is the first party to a contract, the insurance company is a second party to a contract, anyone other than those two would be a third party. And so for a liability claim or liability loss, that is a third party claim. Now, there could be multiple third parties, all right, but there's no such thing as a fourth party, fifth party, or sixth party. Anyone other than the insured, which is a first party, and the insurance company, which is a second party, would be a third party. Okay. Contract law terminology, you do got to know this on your adjuster's exam. I'm not going to go too heavily into this. You can watch the property and casualty webinars that I have on YouTube to get the basics down. It's more the beginning of those webinars, by the way. Okay. So the definition of insurance, it's a contract of indemnity, which means to restore you to what you had before the loss. In order to buy a policy, you have to have insurable interest. Some other definitions, definition of risk, look for uncertainty of a loss. There are two types of risk. We have pure risk, which is possibility of loss only, and speculative risk, which is possibility of loss or gain. That's like gambling. And in insurance, we do not insure speculative risk. We can insure pure risk because you could suffer loss, but we will not insure speculative risk because you may get a gain. And if you can get a gain out of insurance, we will not issue the policy. Okay. Loss is any reduction in the quantity, quality, or value of an asset. The loss does not have to be great. A dent in your finger a dent in your fender shouldn't bankrupt you. However, it's going to cost you money to fix that dent. Okay. And so that's kind of what the loss comes into play. Right? Peril is defined as a cause of a loss. All right. The test will go into perils, which is a covered peril, which is not a covered peril. And they also have cause of loss forms. So remember, a peril is a cause of loss. So fire, explosion, flood, cancer, AIDS, those are common perils. And so if peril is a cause of loss, well, then a cause of loss form is a policy form that lists perils. Now, either we have a named peril policy, which whenever you hear named peril, think of basic, broad, and earthquake. These types of programs actually list the perils that the policy will provide coverage for. So a standard fire policy, although we don't sell it anymore, it's still on the exams a lot of times, covers three perils: fire, lightning, and removal. And so if you suffer a loss from a peril that's not one of those three, fire, lightning, and removal, it wouldn't be covered. So if it's not on the list, it will not be covered. That's what a named peril policy is all about. Now, basic form has a few perils that it covers. Broad is still a named peril form. It just covers more named perils than the basic form would. Okay, and the earthquake peril basically covers earthquake. That's pretty straightforward. Now, the flip side of the coin, on the right side of this chart, we have open peril forms. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase special form or all risk. They might also interchange it like open risk or open perils, open risk. I mean, I've seen it interchangeable. Just we cover anything you could possibly think of, except for this list of exclusions in our policy. Um, so earthquake is typically not covered. Flood, nuclear risk, war, wear and tear, and intentional acts. And so for open peril policies, again, we have a list of exclusions. If it's not on the exclusion list, it's covered. And so get this down. Named peril forms list perils we cover. Open peril forms list perils we don't cover. They're total opposites of each other. One lists perils we cover, one lists perils we don't cover. Where they do trick you is saying which of the following has the broadest coverage. And when you see the broadest coverage, you're going to want to pick broad form. But actually, the special form or open peril coverages are broader in nature because you can only list so many exclusions, and if it's not on that exclusion list, it's covered. Hazards. Hazards are conditions that would increase the likelihood of a peril or a loss occurring. So there's 4 types of hazards: physical, moral, morale, and legal. And these are items that are increasing the likelihood of a loss occurring. And again, these are on the property and casualty webinars. I don't want to dive too deep into that. We kind of talked about this, but which of the following best characterizes a speculative risk? And again, that's gambling. You could win money, you could lose money. So look out for that one. That's pretty straightforward. Through repetition, you'll pick this up. What is a type of loss exposure that would include land and the property attached to it? Now, for property coverage, you cannot insure land. Right? If land, we can insure the building on the land for property coverage, but we don't insure the land because if the building burns down, yeah, it's going to cost money to rebuild the building, but the land is still there. So we don't insure land with property coverage, but we can insure the land for liability because someone could slip and fall on our land, okay, and maybe come after you because they get injured on your property. Which of the following types of loss would result in a claim for monetary damages due to injury to another or damage to another's property? So whenever it's someone else, that's typically liability coverage. Okay, unless they're like an immediate family member, a guest in your house, staying overnight. Typically, it's other people's property, and other people. But if you have a cocktail party, one of your guests or friends slips and falls, that would be covered by your policy under the liability section. The possibility of financial loss resulting from the ownership of property, well, that would be insurable interest. What that means is in order for you to buy a policy, if anything happens to that property or that individual, financially, you've got to be affected. So even though you're expecting to inherit a house from a grandfather, you can't run out and buy a policy on the house because you don't own it yet. All right. Likewise, if that house were to burn down, if it never said grandfather died because in his will he's leaving you the house, if grandfather didn't die, you can't buy a policy and you couldn't collect because it's not your house. Now, if you could collect in that situation, then you'd make a gain. So be wary of things like that. All right. So you cannot get a gain out of insurance. So even though the test will say expectant or contingent interest, all right. So even though you're expecting to inherit a house from a grandfather, you can't buy a policy because you don't own it yet until grandfather passes away. Okay. This is a tricky one. A lot of people kind of make mistakes on. So Bill and Bob have an equal ownership interest in the building worth $100,000. So Bill purchases the property policy on the building for $100,000, and Bob is not listed on Bill's policy, and unfortunately, Bob did not buy his own policy. So if the building were to burn down, how much would each of them collect? So even though Bill purchased $100,000 on the building, he only owns half. So he can only collect his half, which is $50,000. Bob gets nothing because he wasn't named on the policy. He did not buy his own coverage. Okay? So in this situation, they may change it on the test that there could be a partial loss. So let's say there's a $20,000 loss on this building. Again, Bill can only collect his portion or his half of the loss. So when a $20,000 loss, Bill gets $10,000. Bob still gets nothing because he's not on the policy. Okay, so this one's a tricky one about insurable interest. Okay, and a lot of people want to argue the point. Yeah, but he bought 100,000. He should be able to collect 100,000. No, that would be a $50,000 gain if he collected that. Okay, he actually made money on a loss. That's not what insurance is about. An insurance contract versus an insurance policy. So, contract is contracts in general. Um, Insurance is typically a two-party contract. There's got to be consideration, which is an act for a promise. But contracts in general don't have to be in writing. Contracts in general, again, you can just shake hands on it. We trust each other. Insurance contracts have to be in writing because it's an equal distribution. So contracts in general, like I said, don't have to be in writing. So, you ask everybody, hey, can you help me move this weekend? I'll give you, a couple pizzas and some beers. And they say, yeah, that's worth it to me. And so you promise to give them pizza and beer, and they promise to help you move. So promise for promise, that's an equal distribution, equal exchange. Okay. Now, either one of you can cancel at any time, but insurance contracts an unequal distribution, right? Because it's an act of filling out the application and paying the premium for a promise of receiving benefits if a loss occurs. All right. So it's kind of one-sided because once you fill out the application, right, and submit it to the insurance company with the premium, if a loss occurs, unless there's fraud or something, you know, the insurance company has to pay the claim because they promised to pay. You can cancel at any time you want, but once you pay the premium, right, and the company accepts it and issues that policy, they're on the hook for any claims, unless it's fraudulent, okay, misrepresentation or concealment, okay. But in general, it's an act of paying the premium for the promise receiving benefits if a loss occurs. All right, now the client can cancel at any time. And the company can unless there's a legitimate reason to. This happens more so in life insurance, but it's a phrase called unilateral contract. Uni meaning one, lateral meaning sided. So it is a one-sided contract. Legal purpose, you bought the insurance to protect against a loss. Another way of saying protecting against a loss means you cannot get a gain. Now, the test does go a little crazy with the thesaurus, so instead of purpose, they'll use objectives. So legal objectives, legal purpose, it's the same thing. Okay. Agreement is broken down into offer and acceptance. In insurance, right, through the insurance company typically makes the offer to insure the client, and they have to accept that offer. And then they have to make a counteroffer, filling out the application, paying a premium, and the insurance company accepts that counteroffer. And then they may throw another counteroffer back. Yes, we can insure you, but because of this prior loss, we're going to have to charge you a higher premium. Do you still want it? Okay. So it doesn't really matter who makes the offer. Both parties have to agree to the conditions in the contract. Okay. The fourth item here, you got to deal with competent parties. That's people in their right mind. Okay. Use your best judgment. Your company's hired you for a reason. They trust who you are and how you are when you're dealing with the public. Now that's contracts in general. A policy, a little different. So the four parts of a policy is we have the declaration page or the deck sheet. Right? It's the first page of the policy. It just summarizes who is the insurance company and who is the insured, the client. On that deck page, it's going to have an insuring agreement. And for the exam, the insuring agreement basically just tells you what type or kind of policy you bought. Right? So you might get a question that says a clause that describes that an individual purchased a business owner policy would be which of the following? That's the insuring clause. Conditions clause or conditions agreement. Remember, your test goes crazy with the thesaurus. It spells out the obligations of each party. Right? So clients are obligated to pay premium, fill out the application, and companies are obligated to cover them. If a loss occurs, the client is obligated to, provide notice of a loss, proof of a loss, and the insurance company is obligated to investigate, settle, and pay the claim if it's a legitimate claim. Okay, so these are the conditions in the contract. It spells out the duties and rights of both parties, but a lot of times the test will say it spells out the obligations of each party. Okay? Exclusions are quite simple. Just tells you what the company will not cover, or the policy will not cover, I should say. Okay. So those are the four parts of a policy, but we do have some other areas where are also stated in the contract, like definitions, okay? So that you know who you and yours is versus we or us. It defines bodily injury. It defines property damage. It defines things like concurrent causation, okay? So people know. Endorsements, Think of an options package when you buy a brand new car. Additional charge for additional features and benefits that can be added to the program. Okay, and so we'll dive a little bit into that as time goes on. For your personal auto policy, we have liability, which covers you hitting someone else. Here in California, I'm using California. The minimum liability is 15, 30, and 5. Um, every state is slightly different. Some of them have a minimum of 25,050. Okay. Some states have what's called personal injury protection or no fault laws. Okay? So it's a little bit different. So you'll check with your state. For the adjuster's exam, I think you're going to get a taste of both split limits like what we have here, and a little bit of the personal injury and no fault area. Okay. So if liability covers the other people in the other car and the other car that you hit, right, which is what that's about, medical covers you and the passengers in your car that in an accident you caused. So if someone else hits you, their liability covers you. This is you hit them, you injured them, but you also injured yourself and your passengers in your car. So liability covers the other people in the other car. Medical covers you and the passengers in your car. Okay? Now, in case you get hit by someone who does not have insurance, well, then hopefully you have uninsured motorist coverage. All right. Now, uninsured motorist coverage is the only liability coverage that pays you because you got hit by someone who does not have insurance, and it's their fault. Remember, it's got to be their fault. They hit you, it's their fault. They don't have insurance, and so you're getting this coverage to cover you and your family in case other people hit you. They either don't have insurance, which is uninsured motorists, or they don't have enough coverage, which is underinsured motorists. Now, if you notice on this screen, UM and UIM coverage, there's only two numbers. Right? There's a per person and a per occurrence number. Um, it doesn't cover your car. If you want to cover your car because someone without insurance hit it, then you need the uninsured motorist property damage. Okay, and if you don't have the physical damage coverage like collision, the maximum we're going to pay to fix your car is $3,500. Right? Now, if you have collision coverage, well, then this can actually cover your deductible for your collision. It's no fault collision loss. Okay? So California does have lower financial responsibility limits than most other states. So if you're in California, which Randy is in California, he's carrying the minimum limits coverage. And if he goes to another state for a visit and has an accident in that other state, he's automatically provided with the minimum standards of any other state. Okay. So if he drives to Alaska, which has 5,125, but he's only got 1,535 here in California, as long as it's a visit in Alaska, if he does get into an accident, he's provided with Alaska's minimum liability limits for that loss. Now, should he relocate to the state, well, then he should register the car and get the proper coverage for that state. Damage done by an earthquake to an insured auto would be covered under the personal auto policy if they have other than collision coverage. So think of this. Collision is you hit something, you damage your car. Other than collision is something hits you and it damages your car. If you have the other than collision coverage, which in the real world a lot of times they call it comprehensive, it actually covers earthquake and flood because it's not excluded. Okay. It's kind of cool. People don't realize that. If you hit an animal like a deer or a bear or a cow or whatever may you be out there, we always say the animal hit you, and so we'll chalk it up to an other than collision claim. Okay, a lot of people want to. No, I hit the dog. I hit the dog. It's my fault. No. We always say the dog hit you. We always say the animal hit you. Okay, and so if it hit you, it's a comprehensive claim or other than collision claim. Usually lower deductible, and your rates are not going to go up because it's not your fault. Collision claim, higher deductible in most cases, and it is your fault, so your rates will go up. So be wary of that. Okay, coach your clients. Right, claims already knows how that situation works, but again, some clients says, "No, it's my fault. It's my fault." No, it's not. Okay. All right. Which of the following best describes a tortfeasor? Right, someone who is negligent. So you're going to get some questions on tort. A tort is defined as a legal wrong other than a crime or a breach of contract. So crime would be criminal law. Breach of contract is contract law. And tort doesn't cover either one of those areas. The biggest area of tort law would be negligence. That's defined as failure to do what a reasonable and prudent person would do in a given situation. Okay? And that's where, someone was negligent and losses were suffered, your policy can still cover that. Okay. So tortfeasor is the person who's committing the tort, the person who is negligent. Right. So yeah, your test throws out some strange terminology, but it's out there. Okay. You'll get to know a little bit about contract law. What's the difference between a personal auto policy and an insurance services office's personal auto policy? There is no difference. Right? So on the exam, when you see PAP or ISO PAP, it's the same thing. It's a personal auto policy. And honestly, that typically doesn't even have anything to really do with the question. So let me explain. A personal auto policy is a standardized form, okay, which we kind of went through coverage A, B, and C. Okay. Now, insurance companies get that standardized form from the ISO, the Insurance Services Offices. And so all the companies pretty much get their policy forms from the ISO. And so a PAP is the same as an ISO PAP because it's standardized. It's the same thing. Right? And on this test, also, you're going to get this next line here, unendorsed personal auto policy or unendorsed PAP. Now, if you read that word, unendorsed just means you don't have endorsements. Right? You just bought a personal auto policy, which is the same as an ISO PAP. Right? So the test uses this to trip people up. Right? So in your online training, you're learning about personal auto policy this, personal auto policy that, PAP this, PAP that. Then you go take the test and it says under an ISO personal auto policy or under an unendorsed PAP. And you're like, what the heck is that? It's the same stuff you've been studying. That's not even the question. The question will be, under a personal auto policy, I can't speak. Under a personal auto policy, liability coverage covers who? You or them. Well, we already know liability covers the other people that are injured and other people's property that you damage because of your actions. Okay, so under a PAP, liability covers other people. So then under an ISO PAP, liability provides coverage for which of the following, and it's still others. Okay, under an unendorsed personal auto policy, liability coverage provides coverage for which of the following, and it's still others. So the test, I don't know, just by putting ISO in front of something and unendorsed in front of something, people think it's a whole new policy that they never studied, and they think they changed the whole test. Okay, no, that's not even the test question. Remember that. They'll do that for homeowners also. Under an HO3, liability provides coverage for who? Okay. Under an ISO HO3, blah, 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 blah. Under an unendorsed HO3, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So again, they'll use that just to confuse you and throw you off the path of what you've been studying. So be wary. Let's see. The section here, named insured, is anyone who's named on the policy. All right. Jack and Jill either own a house or own a car, and they're named insured. So they're covered by the policy. The first named insured is the first one listed on the contract. All right. So Jack and Jill own a house. Jack and Jill are the named insured. Jack is the first one named. Therefore, Jack is responsible for paying the premium. Jack can request changes in the policy. Jack can cancel the policy. Jack gets any premium refund. Jack can actually transfer the ownership of the policy to someone else with the insurance company's written permission. So even though they're both named, the first named insured controls the contract, and that you got to keep in mind. Right? And the insured is anyone covered by the policy, although not specifically named. So Jack and Joe own a car. They're named insureds. They lend the car to their neighbor because the neighbor's car is in the shop. And so they're friendly neighbors. Yeah, go ahead and use our car, neighbor. And then the neighbor drives off and gets into an accident in Jack and Joe's car. Okay. So the neighbor would still be covered by the policy, although they're not named. Anyone using your vehicle with your permission is covered by your insurance. So always remember, the easiest way to remember it, insurance follows the vehicle. Right? So if you borrow your neighbor's vehicle, it's your neighbor's car, so your neighbor's insurance is primary. If you get into an accident, yours will be secondary or excess. Likewise, if the neighbor borrows your car and gets into an accident, your auto insurance will be primary. The neighbor's will be secondary or excess. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, if an insurer pays an insured $25,000 in lost wages, $45,000 for physician's visits and hospital costs, and $15,000 for physical therapy treatments, later finds out the claim was fraudulent, the insured may be fined as much as $170,000. Now, what it is, submission of a fraudulent claim is a felony. Right? You can receive up to 5 years in prison, and it's a $150,000 fine or double the value of the fraud, whichever is the larger number. So if you add these three numbers together, 25,000, 45,000, 15,000, it equals 85,000. And then you double it. 85 times 2, that's 170,000. 170,000 is more than the 150,000 or double the value of the fraud. And so 170,000 would be the answer here. Okay. So again, just add up the loss. If it is fraudulent, add it up, double it, and then whichever is larger, 150,000 or whatever that double number is, that's the answer you want to pick. Okay. Standard fire policy. We kind of touched on this earlier. It's a policy we don't even sell anymore, but you're going to get questions on it. The standard fire policy only provided coverage for 3 perils: fire, lightning, and a situation called removal. Removal, I call it a situation because it's really not a peril. Right? The example I'm going to use here, let's say, you got fire, lightning coverage. Lightning strikes your house. A lot of times lightning causes fire. Now, in the course of the fire, first things first, get everyone out, call 911, and then remove some of your property out of the burning building to protect it from further loss, of course, without endangering yourself. Okay. So during removal, when you're taking stuff out of the house, putting it in the driveway or your neighbor's yard to protect it from the fire, okay, as you run back in to get some more stuff, when you come out, you come back and put it next to the stuff you had just taken out, and lo and behold, it's missing. That means as you're taking stuff out of your burning house, people are stealing it. So the unavoidable theft during removal is actually covered. In fact, during removal, you have all risk coverage. So even though this is a very, very limited policy, a named peril policy, during the situation of removal, you have all risk coverage. Right? That means that unavoidable theft during removal is covered, although theft in general is not covered by the policy. Right? Fire, lightning, removal isn't a whole lot of coverage. So for a slight additional charge, you can purchase a package of 7 additional perils called extended coverages, or EC. Again, it's 7 perils: windstorm, hail, aircraft rides, vehicle explosion, smoke. Wharves is the best way to remember that. You may get a test question that says, which of the following is not an example of an extended coverage peril? So if you know those 7, windstorm, hail, aircraft rides, vehicle explosion, smoke, well, then you, of course, know that flood and earthquake are not one of those 7 perils. So be wary of that. Okay. If you buy extended coverages, then you can purchase vandalism coverage. Vandalism and malicious mischief. But there is a 60-day limit. What that means is if your house here is left vacant or unoccupied for more than 60 days, we are not going to cover vandalism losses. Okay? I mean, no one's watching your house for 2 months. It kind of becomes a target for vandals, right? And so the risk increases, and the insurance companies don't want to cover things like that. Right? So what perils are insured against under the additional coverages, property removed of a homeowner's policy? And it's all perils. So this is how your test words questions are basically on topics such as removal. So remember I said removal is removing your stuff out of the house, protected from further loss. And during removal, you have top-notch all-risk coverage, which is awesome. This is how removal shows up on the test. What perils are insured against under the additional coverages, property removed of a homeowner's policy? So basically, during removal, what type of coverage do you have? And it's all perils or all risk or open perils. Okay, so that's what that's about. You got to know the difference between the 3 perils under a standard fire policy, which are fire, lightning, and removal, and the 3 perils that are covered under a DP1 dwelling policy basic form, right? And it's fire, lightning, internal explosion. And so the test may ask you which perils are provided, which perils are covered in a DP1, and you need to know it's fire, lightning, internal explosion. But then they'll say, which of the following perils are covered under a standard fire policy? You need to know it's fire, lightning, removal. Okay, but you will see the other answer, so be aware of that. Okay. Homeowners. Section 1 is the property coverage. Theft is included, which is towards the bottom there. And, of course, Section 2 is liability. So Section 1 is property. Section 2 is liability. Theft is part of property. Right? Theft is included in all of them. Now, in a homeowner's policy, the differences in the coverages are what are we protecting? And so, in a homeowner's policy, the property coverages are slightly different to cater to your unique needs. But you notice theft and the liability and medical to others is the same on all the policies. So if you get those comparison contrast questions, liability section, the personal liability and medical to others part of a homeowner's policy is the same on all the policies. You pick and choose the limits. But the property coverages are different. So we're going to start off with an HO4, which is a renter's policy. And HO4, we don't have coverage A or coverage B. Because as a renter, you don't own the building. You don't own that separate garage that you're utilizing to park your car. Remember, you don't have insurable interest. So if you don't own it, you cannot insure it. All right. So even though you're staying there, so the landlord should have a dwelling policy to cover the structure. You're just covering your personal property within that other structure. Now, if this place you're staying in burns down, you need coverage D, which is loss of use, to put you up at a hotel till they rebuild it. You can move back in. Okay. In HO6, we're going to step it up because as an HO6, think of a renters, but now we actually have some structures coverage for the dwelling. Because if you bought a condo, right, you own the kitchen cabinets, the fixtures, and the bathtub, and so you need some coverage for that. But there typically wouldn't be an other structure. Right? You don't own the carport. That's usually covered by the condominium association. Right? So these are some types of coverages. Now, if that's from renters to a condo owner to a homeowner, which is HO2, HO3, or HO5. You have good, you have better, and you have best. HO5 is the best. Okay. The reason is it covers all risk coverage on the building, which we know is great coverage, and all risk coverage on your belongings. So you're going to get questions, which of the following is covered under an HO5 that is not included in an HO3? And it'll be something like mysterious disappearance. Okay, so HO5 just gives you better coverage on personal property, and it's an all-risk form. All risk means we cover anything in the world you could think of except for this list of exclusions, right? And so mysterious disappearance is not on the list. So under an HO5, that would be covered, but HO3 and HO2 would not cover mysterious disappearance because HO2 and HO3 are broad form perils. And so there's a list of perils, and mysterious disappearance is not one of them. Therefore, it's not going to be covered. But since the HO5 does not exclude mysterious disappearance, it would be covered. For those of you that are still kind of blindly going, what the hell is mysterious disappearance? Let's say I'm going to use jewelry as an example. You have a bunch of jewelry sitting somewhere on a counter or on a dresser, and then one of the earrings disappears. Okay, so it's not theft loss because if it was theft, they'd have grabbed all the jewelry. Maybe one of the earrings it just fell off and rolled into a crack on the floor. Maybe the stone fell out of your setting as you hit your hand against the wall and the stone falls out of the ring setting. That's what we call mysterious disappearance. Okay, and that's actually covered under an HO5, but it would not be covered under an HO2 or HO3. Okay. Some additional coverages. Again, if you watch the property and casualty webinar that I have, I go into this a little bit more with a little more detail here. It's more of an adjuster, so we're just going to blow through this. You do need to know the differences in coverage. Homeowners versus dwelling. Homeowners, there's actually 4 parts of the property side, A, B, C, and D. Dwelling, standard fire policy, there's actually 5. But the D and E, D is lost rental income and E is additional living expenses. Under homeowners policy, we just combine it and call it a loss of use. Okay. So as you can see, a homeowner's coverage D, loss of use, provides coverage for additional living expenses and rental income. It's just for a dwelling policy, they just give you 2 parts, part D and part E, versus homeowners part D, which D1 is this, D2 is that. It's the same thing. Okay. Why they did this, I don't know. I couldn't answer that. But as much as you think the property sections are different between a homeowners and dwelling policy, they're really not. Okay. So dwelling, whenever you hear dwelling policy, think of landlord. Okay. In order to buy a homeowner's policy, you own it, you live in it. But dwelling is you own it and you don't live in it. Or you own it and it's just too large to be covered under homeowners. Your homeowner's policy covers 1 to 2 living units. So a single family home, maybe a duplex. Or you own 2 homes. You live in one, your sister lives in the other. Okay, you can get a homeowner's policy up to 2 units. If it's more than 2 units or you don't live there, then you go to dwelling. And so dwelling, again, view this as a landlord policy. It only covers property. At the top here, we have DP1, then DP2 and DP3. So just like homeowners, HO2 is good if you own a home. HO3 is better, but HO5 is the best. For dwelling, DP1 is good. DP2 is better, but DP3 is the best. Okay, and the difference is the perils. So about 2/3 across this chart, if you look at the perils, a DP1 only covers 3 perils: fire, lightning, and internal explosion. Right below that, the broad form DP2, we cover those basic perils, plus we add that extended coverages, right? Remember the windstorm, hail, aircraft riots, vehicle explosion, and smoke. We do provide vandalism and malicious mischief, where under DP1, you'd have to add those on. But DP2, it's already included. Falling objects, burglary, collapse, and there's a couple other perils that are also included under a DP2 that are not covered on a DP1. Okay. And then, of course, the DP3, the special form, is all risk. So we have great coverage, all risk coverage on the structure, but we still have broad form coverage on the contents in the structure. All right? That's how a DP3 is. So all risks, so just pay attention to exclusions. Coinsurance equation. If there is a loss, there may be a coinsurance requirement, and so you do need to know the equation. This could be a test question right here. What is the coinsurance equation? It's the amount of insurance you did have divided by the amount of insurance you should have had. You take that fraction, you multiply it by whatever the loss is. The test will give you the loss. That's going to tell you how much the company will pay on a claim, minus any possible deductible. Okay, you got to get this equation down, right? And you're going to get a couple of these questions. So an example is we have an apartment house that's worth $500,000. The owner insures it for $300,000. The policy has an 80% coinsurance clause, and there is a $200,000 loss. So the insurer will pay, and some people think, well, they probably pay the $200,000 minus the deductible, but that's not one of your answers. So we want to plug them into the formula. Remember how much insurance you did have. Let's calculate that. Well, the question says we have $300,000. How much insurance should you have? Well, the should is the 80% coinsurance value of the property. All right. So 80% of the value of the building of $500,000 is $400,000. So you did have 300. You should have had 400. All right. That simplifies realistically to 3/4. So 3/4 times that loss of 200,000 equals 150,000. Okay. Always remember that the bottom number of the fraction is the 80% coinsurance number. All right. They typically give that to you. There is a calculator on the screen, or if the computers are down, there's a 4-function calculator that they provide for you. All right, so be aware of that. But as long as you get the equation down and you know which number goes where in that equation, you'll be fine. What they might do is just change up the question. An apartment house is worth $500,000. The owner insures it for $540,000. This policy has an 80% coinsurance clause. There's a $200,000 loss. The insurer will pay. This time we actually pay the full amount. Okay. In the previous example, they bought less coverage than the value of the building. Well, here they actually bought more coverage than the value of the building. And so they overinsured, number one, but that means the loss is covered. All the client has to do is pay a deductible. Okay? That's what that's about. So watch out, because they might flip the numbers on you. Valuation on the adjuster's exam, very common. How is it covered? What the definitions are. So replacement cost is, what does it cost to replace this building brand new, or this property brand new? No depreciation. So we're not going to, make it used property. We're going to replace it with brand new property. Actual cash value is, what does it cost to replace that property minus the given depreciation that the test will provide. Okay, and so basically that's the used price of your belongings. And so typically for homeowners, we're going to rebuild your house. We're going to use replacement costs for the house, rebuild the house, but all your stuff in the house, we're going to depreciate it. Okay, so rebuild the house brand new, but all your belongings we replace on an actual cash value basis. Okay, Please remember under homeowners and dwelling, your personal property is covered anywhere in the world. Okay. So market value, look for the keyword. If it were sold on the open market, like just an hour before you got into an auto accident, that's what we would pay. Okay. And then we have stated value or valued policies. And whenever you see that, look for the fine arts, antique cars. Okay. And so you and the insurance company agree to a stated value. That in the event of a partial loss, we're going to pay actual cash value on the partial loss up to the limits of insurance that you agreed to purchase on the property. So if you had a fine art and you have a stated value policy, 1/4 of that fine art painting, let's say, is destroyed. Well, it's not a total loss. Only 1/4 is damage. But you really cannot replace 1/4 of a painting. And so in a partial loss, we can give you a full payout. Okay. And that's what the stated value policy is. Again, an antique car, if you damage an antique car, they don't make those cars, probably can't even find those parts anymore. And so in a partial loss, you could get a full payout. That's what that's about. Okay. Now, writing multiple locations, we're kind of on the commercial side. All right. And there's 3 ways of writing multiple locations. You have specific, scheduled, and blanket policies. So specific, as you can see, if you go from left to right, is very specific. You have specific amounts of coverage on each specific piece of property, and it's at whichever specific location it may be. Okay. Scheduled means you have different amounts of coverage on different pieces of property, and apparently they are at different locations. All right. So the best way for me to explain this is I'm going to start off with a jewelry store where you have very expensive, unique items. Okay. And so you need specific amounts of coverage on each specific piece of jewelry. And you actually have to tell the insurance company specifically which location that jewelry is at. So if you had 3 jewelry stores, and let's say, one of your customers at one of the stores wanted to look at some platinum pieces, and those platinum pieces are at a different store. If you're going to move them to this store and display it so that customer can come in and take a look at it, you have to tell the insurance company immediately that jewelry, that inventory has moved to a different location. You got to tell them which location it's at. Okay, so it's pretty detailed. Right? Schedule would be different amounts of coverage on different pieces of property. So maybe you have a sporting goods over here, maybe you have a clothing store over here, and maybe you have like a dollar store over there. Okay. And so you do want different amounts of coverage on each of your different pieces of property, and they are at different locations. All right. Now, let me explain these two. On the test, they're going to give you an example. Someone has specific amounts of coverage on specific pieces of property at different locations. Or someone has different amounts of coverage on specific pieces of property at specific locations. Or maybe they have specific amounts of coverage on different pieces of property at specific locations. Now, anytime you see the word different in one of those 3 categories, different coverage, different property, different location, even though the other 2 items are specific, your answer is going to be scheduled. All right. Specific is so specific, there's no deviation. Specific amounts of coverage on each specific piece of property, specifically which location it's at. Okay. I hope you get that. So anytime you see the word different in one of those 3 categories on the test, that's going to be scheduled writing limits. Okay. Now, blanket is you have multiple locations with similar risks, like you got 3 dollar stores. Okay. And so rather than get a policy for each location, why don't we just buy a blanket policy which covers all our property at all of our locations? That means with that one, it's a lot easier that you can move stuff around between your locations and not have to tell them specifically which location it is. Okay. And so we're blanketing all your locations, right, and all your properties, so you can move them around. Specific and scheduled, a lot of times if you do move property from one location to another, you should notify the insurance company. On scheduled, some people may or may not. Specific, you really have to. Okay. And so be wary of that. All right. Regarding losses, you have direct loss, which is direct physical loss, damage, or destruction to your property. Now, because of that direct loss, like a restaurant burns down, now you have this indirect or consequential loss. So because the restaurant burns down, which is a direct loss, and we're not open for business, it's going to take a while to rebuild. Well, now we have this indirect loss where the insurance company has to pay the lost business income that restaurant would have normally earned if they were open for business, right? So it's indirect, consequential. So business income, extra expense coverage, those are indirect or consequential loss coverages. Always remember the direct loss is the damage to the property. And so you got into an auto accident, that's a direct loss, but now your car is in the shop. And so the indirect loss is now, if you have that coverage, the insurance company will pay for a rental car so you can go on about your life while we're fixing your car in the shop. Okay? So there's direct and indirect, and know the difference. Concurrent causation, you have two perils that act together. One is covered, one's not. Both are going to be covered. Okay? So an example would be a standard fire policy covers fire, lightning removal. Okay? That's all it covers. So let's try something here. Because when you look at a standard fire policy, you don't see water damage listed. Therefore, water damage is not covered. But let's try something. Like I said, lightning strikes your house, and a lot of times lightning causes fire. And so the firefighters come out to your house and they dump a ton of gallons of water on your house to put the fire out. But now we have water damage. Under concurrent causation, you have two perils that are acting in tandem, the fire and the water damage. One is covered, fire, one is not, water damage, but since they work together, both would be covered. Okay, that's concurrent causation. Two perils act in tandem, one is covered, one's not, both are covered. Now the next one is concurrent causation exclusion. All right, so if you had an HO5, very liberal policy, it's an all-risk form, has a very limited list of exclusions. One of the exclusions is earthquake. Okay, but what's not excluded on the policy would be collapse. So collapse is a covered peril under an HO5, right? But earthquake is specifically excluded. So now we have two perils. Let's say earthquake rumbles through, causing your house to collapse, and causing a loss. So now we have two perils acting in tandem. One is covered, collapse, but one is specifically excluded, earthquake. And under concurrent causation exclusion, if one peril is covered but one is specifically excluded, neither would be covered. So it's kind of the opposite of concurrent causation. All right, again, concurrent causation, two perils act in tandem, one is covered, one's not, both are covered. But the concurrent causation exclusion, two perils act in tandem, one is covered, one is specifically excluded, then neither will be covered. Okay? And of course, we've got to take it one more step further. Your homeowner's policy is a fire policy or property policy. Okay? It's interchangeable. And so if an earthquake rumbles through, causing your house to collapse, and in the collapse it snaps a gas line, causing an explosion and subsequent fire, how much would your policy pay? Now, in this situation, earthquake is specifically excluded. So any loss associated with earthquake is not going to be covered. But fire and explosion are actually covered by your homeowner's policy. And so the adjusters, that's your job when you get this up and running, you have to determine how much of that loss was earthquake, how much was explosion, and how much is fire. And the insurance company will only pay for the explosion and fire loss. Right? So even though earthquake caused explosion and fire, the policy will still pay for explosion and fire. It just won't cover the earthquake loss. Right? All right. Concurrency. So if you have two policies on a loss, and then if the perils are exactly the same, so you have a broad form policy and you have another broad form policy, and why they have two policies on one property, I don't know. It just happens once in a while. So this is what we call concurrent coverage. All right, where you have two policies that cover exactly the same perils on a loss or on a risk. Okay. Non-concurrent is where you have two policies on a property, but the perils don't match. And so what that means is you have two property policies. One's a special form, which is all risk, and one's a basic form, which is a named peril. So they're both property policies, okay, but the perils don't exactly match. And so that would be non-concurrency or non-concurrent coverage, okay? So be wary, concurrent causation versus concurrency, okay? So, I mean, there's some similar terminology, and you just got to keep them separate. All right. If a loss occurs, all right, this is how claims should be handled. First things first, if a loss occurs, the client should immediately notify the insurance company. And when I say immediately, a lot of times on the test, they'll say in writing. Right? I know after your house burns down, it's tough to find some paper to write a letter to the insurance company. Hey, I've suffered a loss. Right? So, but again, on the test question, you might get that. A notice of a loss is immediately in writing, okay, or just immediately. The first thing the insurance company is going to do when they accept that is they're going to acknowledge you suffered a loss. Of course, you, the insurance agent, or the insurance agent, I should say, that you're going to be representing to some extent, they need to acknowledge the loss. Okay, understand you suffered a loss. Are you okay? We're sending some people out there. Whatever we got to do. And so that's the first thing the insurance company is going to do is acknowledge you suffered a loss. The second thing, they're going to begin their investigation on the claim. Okay, send their people out, the adjusters out there, do what they got to do. And in some cases, they may give you claim forms in which the client has to fill out and return it to the insurance company, basically saying, this is, what I suffered. This is the loss and the damages in the property that I was destroyed because of this situation. So I call that your ABCs with notice of a loss, right? So once you notify the insurance company you suffered a loss, A, they acknowledge the loss, B, they begin the investigation, and C, in some cases, they'll send you claim forms. So the client's job is to fill out the claim forms and submit proof of loss. Now, proof of loss typically needs to be submitted within 60 days of the loss. Okay. Now, this is your third-party material, your receipts, right? Pictures show proof that you suffered a loss. When the insurance company receives due proof of loss, they're supposed to pay the claim immediately. Unless it's questionable, which you do, the insurance company do have to notify the clients, or the insureds, I should say, that it's still under investigation. There's a couple things that we're still, sorting out. So, but the client has to be informed. So if your claim does not follow this practice, this simple guideline, it could be an example of an unfair claims practice. Like how about if the insurance company says, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you resubmit proof of loss? Resubmit. What do you mean resubmit? That means you already acknowledge you got proof of loss. You want me to resubmit? That seems unfair. It's like they're delaying paying a claim. Okay. If the insurance company denies the claim and they tell the client, hey, we're not going to pay your claim, you're not going to get a premium refund, and do not hire an attorney. I mean, you can't tell someone not to obtain the services of an attorney. You can tell them you might want to consider getting an attorney, but you can't say don't get an attorney. Okay. Attempting to settle a claim for less than what a normal person would feel they'd be entitled to. You bought a brand new Mercedes, you have adequate coverage, you totaled the thing, it's destroyed, and the insurance company gives you a check for $1,000 because that's all that block of scrap metal is now worth after the accident. I mean, that's less than what a normal person would feel they'd get if they bought a brand new Mercedes and got into an accident with it. See? And so that would be unfair claims practice, right? So keep that in mind. In the auto insurance world, let me dive in a little further here. In the auto insurance world, you can take your car anywhere you want to get it fixed. Now, people don't realize that. And so if you damage your car and you come to the insurance agent, as an insurance agent, okay, I cannot require where you go to get your car fixed. Okay, I can't even recommend where you go get your car fixed unless you, the client, ask me for the recommendation. Okay, so keep that in mind. I cannot require where the customer goes to get the car fixed. I can't even recommend where they go to get their car fixed unless they ask me for the recommendation. Okay, otherwise you might be trying to steer them. And if they do ask me, I cannot require that they travel an unreasonable distance to get their car inspected or get it repaired at a specific repair shop. Another thing is if I refer people to a repair shop because a client asked for it, I can't get any financial benefit like a kickback for referring people to that repair shop. Because who ultimately pays for the kickback I'm getting is the clients who are taking their car and paying for it, right? Or the insurance companies. And so be wary of that. Now for property, that's for auto. For property, I can require that you have insurance on the property. I can recommend where you get the insurance on the property, as long as it's just a recommendation. But I cannot require which agent I cannot require which agent or broker you buy that insurance from. So property and auto is slightly different on that. Remember, for property, I can recommend where you go to get insurance, But for auto losses, I cannot recommend where you get your car fixed unless you ask me for the recommendation. So little subtle things like that, don't mix them up. Okay, it's a little tricky. Some types of evidence. Whenever you hear real property, think of something structural and tangible. Right? I'm using weapons, right? So demonstrative evidence is a model that will show what likely happened at a given time or place. All right. Yeah, they might even have footage of your neighbors filming you standing there, not trying to put the fire when you're out when your house is on fire. Documentary evidence, a letter, a blog, or some other document, even text messages, right? It verifies you were texting while you got in the auto accident. A testimonial evidence would be a witness testimony, either a character witness, as they do have those people, those character witnesses, or someone who visually witnessed what happened. Okay, so these are different types of evidence. As an adjuster, you'll need to know the difference between these four. They'll give you a sampling. You got to define which one it is. For loss settlement, if there's a liability loss, okay, it's typically resolved through arbitration if there's a dispute. Right. Each of you pick an arbitrator. These two arbitrators pick a third arbitrator. They hear both sides, and then they'll make a decision. Right. And it is binding. Right. That's for liability disputes. For property, we're going to use appraisal. Again, you pick an appraiser. The insurance company picks an appraiser. These two appraisers then pick an umpire. All right, so you plead your case to the umpire hears it, both sides, and makes a decision, which again is binding. So always remember, for liability disputes, it goes to arbitration. For property disputes, it's going to go to appraisal. Okay. Now, under tort law, we have different variations of how things are covered or not covered. So in this example, X is in an accident with Y. X suffers $5,000 of damage, but it is determined that Y is 60% responsible for the accident. How much would X receive under contributory negligence? Whenever you see that the phrase contributory negligence, that means if you contribute in any way, shape, or form, you don't collect. So where this commonly occurs is, let's say two people back out of a parking lot at the same time and they both bump each other. So they both contributed to the loss, but neither of their insurance companies pay the other party. Under contributory negligence rules, that's what that's about. Right? We don't have contributory negligence in a lot of states. Not all of them, but a lot of them. It got replaced by comparative negligence. Right? So again, same question, but or same information, but the question changes. How much would X receive under comparative negligence? Remember, when you see contributory negligence, you get nothing. But when you see comparative negligence, compare means we share the claim. Right? So if X suffers $5,000 of damage, but it determines that Y is 60% responsible, then X can collect 60% of the loss. Okay? So again, two people back out of a parking stall, they hit each other at the same time at the shopping mall. Both contributed to the loss, and they're going to share the claim. That's what comparative negligence means. We share the claim. But under contributory, you get nothing. If you contribute in any way, shape, or form, you get nothing. Okay, so know the difference between the two. You will get a couple questions on these to help determine what the payout is. Workers' compensation and employers' liability. Workers' comp policies have two parts. Part one would be the workers' comp, which protects against statutory claims. Now, whenever you see statutory claims, these are claims provided or required to be provided by state law. Okay? And workers' compensation has four benefits: medical, disability income, death, and rehab. Medical, no time limit, no dollar limit. All right, there may be limits on a certain type of care, like chiropractic care, but overall, medical benefits are unlimited if it's a work-related loss or injury. Not just on the job, work-related. This is a tricky part for a lot of people. All right. So, a lot of people think, oh, when you're on the job. Okay, no, work related. So let's say you have an unpaid 1 hour for lunch. Okay, and so as you're heading out to lunch, your employer says, hey, where are you going for lunch? So I'm going to go over to McDonald's over here, about a block away. They say, hey, pick up my dry cleaning. It's right next to McDonald's, and bring it back to me. You say, okay. And so on your little stroll to McDonald's and picking up the dry cleaning and walking back, you trip and fall and you break your leg. Okay. Now, that wasn't on the job, but you're doing something at the direction of your employer. So it would be work related, and that could, your workers' compensation could actually cover that because you're doing something at the direction of your employer. And so be wary of the definition on your test. Injured while engaging in activities for wage or profit is kind of how you'll see it, but look for work related. Okay. The areas where we will actually deny workers' comp claim is, intentional action will not be covered. If you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, you're not going to be covered, right? Or you're doing something that's not even part of the job, okay? Then they may deny the claim. But other than that, workers' compensation is pretty comprehensive, I should say. Okay. The disability income typically pays 66 and 2/3 of your wages, subject to minimum and maximum weekly amounts. And so if you are injured and you're out of work, there's usually a 3-day wait, 72-hour wait, and they will pay you missing income to the tune of 66 and 2/3 of your gross weekly wages. Gross weekly wages minus taxation is about that 66 and 2/3. And please understand, workers' compensation income benefits are tax free. Right? Not just total disability where you can't work, but also partial disability where maybe you hurt your back where you can only work 4 hours a day. And so the other 4 hours you're going to go home to recover, and your workers' compensation could pay you those missing 4 hours every day because of this partial disability. Right? But still combined no more than 66 and 2/3 of your gross weekly wages. Right? Death benefits are provided in all 50 states. We have a lump sum burial amount, and there's also income to your surviving spouse in most states until they remarry. Okay. So that's death benefit. It's got to be a work-related loss again. Okay. Rehabilitation is a cost-cutting mechanism. It covers the cost to get you up and running again, either at your own occupation or maybe some other career path where you can make comparable income. Now, workers' comp, a lot of people always think of accidental injury, but you do need to know that the medical also covers work-related diseases. Okay. Now, a common cold or a flu is not going to be a workers' comp claim because you can get the cold or get a flu even if you don't even have a job. But if you're a coal miner, you could get black lung. And so since it's unique to the job, it would be classified or could be classified as work related and therefore covered by the policy. Okay. So work related injuries, accidents, and diseases. Keep that in mind. So that's section 1. Now, section 2 is employer's liability, which protects against common law claims. And as you can read here, it covers those people that fall out of the workers' comp section of the policy. So I typically help explain this is, let's say we have a doctor at a hospital and they contract a rare liver disease. They go home and they give it to their spouse. Now, the doctor would be covered under workers' compensation because they're employed by the hospital, but the spouse wouldn't be. They don't even work at the hospital. But then they get it from the doctor who got it from their work. Well, that means that spouse could file a claim against the employer's liability section of the workers' comp policy, and it could cover their medical bills. Okay. Under employer's liability, there's an unlimited liability exposure because they can sue to have that claim covered and deal with it if it's ongoing. And that could bankrupt an employer if they don't have adequate limits there. All right. But those are the two parts of a workers' compensation policy. A couple other items. Each state's slightly different here. In purchasing workers' comp, you can do self-funding. Self-funding is you don't even buy workers' comp. You just set up an account and put a ton of money in it, and you cover your employees' workers' comp losses out of your company's assets. It's great if you have lots of employees for predictability and a lot of money to cover them, right? But it's not great if you don't have a lot of employees for predictability and or you don't have a lot of money to cover those losses. You might even go bankrupt. So a more subtle way of self-funding is let's get a workers' comp policy, but let's have a high deductible. Let's say $2 million. So you know how you raise your deductible on your auto insurance to cut your premiums? Okay, well, how about if we raised our deductible for workers' comp to cut our costs? So with a $2 million deductible on a workers' comp policy, that lowers the price of the insurance. Okay, and so you, the employer, basically cover the first $2 million of your employees' claims, workers' comp claims, for that policy period. Once you pay $2 million in claims, then the insurance company kicks in and covers the rest. And so, you can save a lot of money by having, high deductible, low premium workers' comp. Worst case scenario, you pay $2 million in claims, and the insurance company covers the rest, which keeps your company from going bankrupt. Okay, so that's self-funding. You can buy that buy workers' comp from a private insurance company, or some states have a state fund where you actually purchase workers' compensation through the state fund. Now, some states give you a choice. You can buy it from the state fund, private insurance company, or you can self-fund. Some states, you only can buy it from a private insurance company because there is no state fund. Some states, you have to buy it from a state fund. Private insurance companies are not allowed. And that's what we call a monopolistic state fund at the bottom of this chart, okay, where private insurance companies are not allowed. Now, you can either use a monopolistic state fund, but those states also sometimes let you self-fund. But again, if you see monopolistic state fund, then they don't have private insurance companies providing workers' compensation in that state. Okay. Some additional items: voluntary compensation. All right. Again, these are covering people. You're voluntarily, as a gesture of goodwill, providing workers' comp benefits for people that normally would not be covered. Right. Like a nonprofit organization, you have volunteers that help out. And what if them are injured while engaging in the nonprofit activities? And so, as a gesture of goodwill, you can buy this voluntary compensation, which can provide workers' compensation benefits for them. Again, subcontractors, contractors may want to purchase it. Subcontractors should get their own, but sometimes things happen. So, again, you always want to look out for yourself. Foreign coverage endorsement could be added to your workers' comp policy, which provides workers' compensation 7 days a week, 24 hours a day in another country. It can include an endemic disease as occupational. Like if you go down to the rainforest and you're working out there and you get malaria, it's kind of unique to that area, right? This would help cover your medical bills. In some cases, a lot of times, foreign coverage endorsement also allows you to buy repatriation coverage. What that means is they're going to cover the cost to get you out of that third world country to a U.S. care treatment facility. Bring you back to the U.S. for treatment. Okay, that's basically what that is. All right. Some states have a subsequent or second injury fund. And so let's say we have a guy, he loses one eye on the job, whatever he's doing. Okay. So we pay a specific dollar amount because he lost sight in one eye. Usually it's a lump sum benefit. Okay. And so we paid because this guy lost his eye in the job. Now, if you pay, let's pluck a number out of a tree. We paid $13,000. Again, I'm plucking numbers out of a tree. We paid $13,000 because this guy lost sight in one eye on the job. Okay. Well, he still got another eye. He can still function. But as an employer, would you want to keep him around? Because with one eye, what if he suffers a loss and he loses sight in his second eye? Now he's totally incapacitated as far as sight is concerned, and that's going to warrant a higher benefit amount. So if we paid $13,000 for loss of sight in one eye, we don't pay $13,000 because he lost the other eye. We pay like $140,000 because he lost sight in the other eye. So once that first injury occurs, most employers would want to fire those handicapped people because they don't want a second injury occurring and having another expensive workers' comp loss, right, or increased workers' comp loss, unless there was a mechanism in place. And that's what this subsequent or second injury fund is all about. It helps increase certain social goals, and it allows employers to hire handicapped people because this covers the increase in compensation should they have a previous injury and suffer a secondary or subsequent injury. Okay. So that's how you want to understand that. 24-hour coverage, very rare, but some states do provide this. We have workers' comp combined with a disability or health policy, which gives you 7 days a week, 24 hours a day coverage. The kicker is workers' comp on the job, you have medical, income, death, and rehabilitation benefits. But off the job, you only have medical. So it's incomplete. Now, workers' compensation medical is pretty much unlimited. Not too many unlimited health insurance policies on the market. So on the job, you got the great coverage, medical, income, death, and rehab. But off the job, you've got health insurance, which may not be fully covering you if you had a loss off the job. And plus, if you're missing work because of that injury off the job, there's no income. Okay, so it sounds good in theory, but in reality, there's some gaps in coverages, just so you know. But basically, yeah, it's an insurance company either partnering with a state fund or an insurance company offering both sides, the workers' comp and a health policy packaged up. All right. Makes it convenient. I mean, price-wise, it would be cheaper because we're combining policies, right? But not necessarily out there. Along with those are state. Remember, workers' comp is typically state-run, but we do have some federal workers' compensation programs. You have the Jones Act covering masters and crewmen of ocean-going vessels. Longshoremen and harbor workers, again, those people that load and unload ships, right? And of course, we talked about coal miners are covered by the Federal Black Lung Compensation Act. That's something else when the name of the disease you may get at the occupation is actually listed in the workers' compensation fund that's actually protecting you. Federal Black Lung Compensation Act. But again, the federal government steps in where private insurance companies typically cannot financially handle those high risk areas. Outside of going to Lloyd's of London and some other non admitted companies, the federal government provides some insurance benefits, I guess you'd say. The federal government is not an insurance company, but they are an insurer, and they do provide insurance in certain high risk areas. Okay. If you have not registered, consider it. I've got sample test questions for you to study that will help you get you through your exam. When you do register, you have access to me where you can reach out and ask me questions while you're studying if you need more clarification. If you come across some topics you need a little more info, let me know. I'm going to tell you how you'll typically see it on the exam versus, remember, you Google it or Wikipedia the term, they're going to give you the general definition, but it's not going to be the same one you'll typically see on your exam. Okay. There's my cell phone. You can call me if you do have questions, or you can email me at lauren@lgdconsulting.com. At this point in time, I typically open up for questions, but it's a real simple webinar I just wanted to record and get it online for some of you. So for those of you that do watch this, thank you, thank you, thank you. Hopefully you like the material. Please subscribe and give me a thumbs up and give me some feedback. If you've taken the test, give me some feedback on some things I can add or change for people coming down the pipeline that also want to get licensed. We can help them out, okay? With that, we'll call it a night. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.